The other question that comes to mind, and then maybe we'll sort of open it up to others who want to come in, is you speak repeatedly about the importance of context. The South African Constitution clearly is the touchstone for your balancing and using proportionality, and human dignity is the core of the South African Constitution. Now, Ireland has a constitution. The United Kingdom, in which 3 of the commissions here operate, doesn't have a constitution. And the context here, again, you were speaking last night about constitutional resilience, particularly post 9/11 and the counter-terrorist legislation and the challenges that presents to proportionality and human dignity. The context in the UK over the next 2 or 3 years is very relevant, I think, for this subject, in that because of the lack of constitutional resilience in the UK, even though we don't have a constitution, and the erosion of the European Convention on Human Rights, particularly in attempts to have unlimited detention of suspected foreign terrorists, the question of control orders, the question of use of evidence obtained through torture. All of these have created pressures that both the major political parties in the United Kingdom are seeking to address, and the elections coming up next year. So the Human Rights Act itself stands to be repealed if the Conservative government is elected, and they would introduce, according to their current policy, what's termed a British Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. The Labour Party in power doesn't call for repealing the Human Rights Act and resigning from the European Convention on Human Rights, but also is consulting on the merits of having a British Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. The context being the judges have got in the way of counter-terrorist measures that the government wants to carry out, particularly not being free to deport to third countries where there's a risk of torture, suspected terrorists who are resident in the UK. So for the public and for national human rights institutions, there's going to be a very big public debate over the next 2 or 3 years. One on the balance, rights, duties, responsibilities, the clear attempt by the mainstream political parties to redress the balance in favour of the state as opposed to the individual and the broader community. And that whatever Bill of Rights is brought in, if one is brought in by either party, it's certainly not going to have economic, social and cultural rights. Interesting thing here is, as you know, in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Commission has been leading the initiative for a Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland, which would include economic, social and cultural. So there's a very vibrant debate going to be taking place, and I'm just wondering how you would see the way in which these principles of human dignity and proportionality in that context, how they could be perhaps most effectively addressed during what is going to be a very challenging period for all of our institutions and for the broader public.
Well, I'm very aware of the fact that as a judge, it's inappropriate for me to comment on hot political topics in my own country, and even less appropriate hot political topics in a country that I'm visiting. What I do notice is that whatever the legal structures involved, similar issues are cropping up in different countries. So the United States, with a very strong constitution, historic, well-entrenched ones, they have the same battles, they just manifest themselves in different forms. And in the end, I think it comes down to certain core values. So when Justices Breyer and Ginsburg and others in the US Supreme Court end up denouncing the Guantanamo Bay type trials that are being held, they have resort to certain deep fundamental principles that go to the very heart of the democracy in which they live. And in the end, it comes down to saying there are just some things you just don't do to human beings in your country, because they go to the core of what it means to be a democracy that respects certain fundamental rights. So you don't torture. And you don't examine the question of torture on the basis of does it give information, ticking bomb, all these. I attended a conference in University of Chicago on torture, and as I came in, a professor was giving a cost-benefit analysis of torture and saying that the bad name that you get and the denunciation of it is a cost. There's another cost that maybe the information is unreliable, but the benefits are that it might save lives and so on, and it's sort of weighing up the two. I felt sick. I almost couldn't make my presentation, and I started off by saying, you couldn't have this debate in Chile, you couldn't have this debate in Argentina, you couldn't have this debate in South Africa, where torture was used at such a massive scale. Because the country has a horror, I say the country, it's the people of deep conscience who struggle to make it a better place, just have a horror at doing these things, just like you don't have capital punishment. It might be a deterrent. You don't have it because you don't do these things to people in a country that stands for certain norms. I also happen to think that standing for those norms has a huge instrumental, what's the opposite of deficit? Profit and gain. And it creates the context and climate in which you can pursue your intelligence gathering and you can win over people, and it's more difficult for those who are planning against you to find safe houses, to get away with what they're doing. You can't separate the morality, the deep morality aspects from the intelligence gathering and the isolation of those who want to destroy what you're doing. So you need to emphasize the distance between yourselves and those who want a more totalitarian kind of society, or who are using what I would call totalitarian and reckless methods. You need to do that. It has instrumental values as well as moral values.